All right, Seekers and Quilt people, welcome back. So happy to be here. Another beautiful day to continue the work. Today's topic, the Time Traveler'S Map. Because we're going to do a little time travel today. How's that sound? So I wanted to do this video to kind of illustrate how we tether our minds to either the past, the present, or the future, right? Like we're just very, using our thoughts and our imagination in one of those directions, and how we can use that information to better our lives, to better ourselves, to better the way that we go throughout the day and provide an opportunity for healing for others rather than for, more attack thoughts and more, chaos being brought into the world. Okay. So, we're going to do a little time travel. I hope that you're ready. Buckle up. Right? So, are you ready? What I want you to do while I do my time traveling is to just watch the energy signature of myself. Like, what's my vibe as I do this exercise? Right? So, be mindful of that and just watch for that. I wanted to start this exercise by kind of starting from the beginning. Like, where did all of this start from, right? And kind of to also just to unearth a little bit of my story, because maybe if you're new to this, you don't really know who I am. I'm still figuring that out. Welcome. So the story goes like this. Like, this is kind of just the truncated version of my life, of what has happened. Okay? So I grew up in a suburb of Vancouver, British Columbia, as a very queer child, being raised in a very Christian environment. The type of Christian environment where the Bible is the literal Word of God, and there is no room for interpretation otherwise. What is written is the Word of God, as if God Himself wrote it. That's where I come from. And that was all fine and good, and we were just a very middle-class family. My father was a minister, and my mom was, a substitute school teacher teaching home ec. Very wholesome, very middle of the road, very kind of not unique. Right? And that was totally fine. I mean, I really enjoyed, my Christian upbringing up until the point where I started to realize that I was gay. And as any queer child being raised in a punitive faith community knows, like, that instills a real sense of terror and fear, because you realize I'm not going to be accepted in my tribe. I'm going to be thrown out of everything I know if they find out the truth. So it causes you from a very young age to become a liar. It causes you from a very young age to forgo yourself and to hide yourself in exchange for safety, right? In exchange for what is acceptable. Because it was becoming very clear that a gay person in the Christian environment I was being raised in was just truly unacceptable. And the way my parents talked about gay people, and again, this was like late 70s, early 80s, they didn't know any better. They were just parroting what they had heard and been taught by, their peers and fellows. So my father being the Baptist minister, we studied the Bible. I know the Bible. I know the Bible inside and out. And it is hilarious to me to have conversations with, Christians who have actually never read it. And just don't, because you will lose. I know my stuff. Okay? So, once that time in my life was kind of realized, and from the time I was probably 8, 10 years old, I knew I was super queer, because I just am. There's no hiding it. And, I did the best I could to kind of get by, but from the time I was 14, I was actively plotting how I was going to escape this environment so that I could just go and be myself, because I was living a lie. I was living a double life. I had my internal life, which was me, but then I had this other life that I was showing the rest of the world, an acceptable version of me, a neutered version of me, right? A version that could be tolerated in the Christian environment that I grew up. Because the Bible is super clear that queer expression is an abomination. And my family towed the party line. That was what the book said, so that's what they taught. And again, like, I'm just feeling less and less safe, like, in my world. And because I'm, so obviously gay, I was being beaten up at school. I was being verbally beaten up at home. Not that they knew I was gay, but because they were saying things that were terrorizing me, that was shutting me down, right? And so I was having to just, like, not be me. And there was no safe place for me to be me. And I was really clear about that I needed to escape. So that's what I did. I found something I was good at, which happened to be ballet. Hello. And that got me a scholarship to a professional ballet school, and I left home. But I was very calculating from the time I was 14 until the time I left home at 17, because I started dance training at 10 years old. So once I found that path, I'm like, oh, because other, young dancers were being picked up and swept off to professional ballet schools all across the country from even the ballet school that I was in. And I'm like, oh, like, sign me up, I'm out of here. And so having found that path forward, I ran away. I ran away from home. I knew I was not safe in my family environment, and so I left. After I left, I waited a few years, because I left at 17. I hadn't even graduated high school. I did a GED at the University of Winnipeg with a bunch of adults in order to just get some, formal education in order to get a high school diploma. Because I was already, dancing around the world and on tour and, doing all these other, great, fabulous things, which was really fun and really lit me up. But, at the same time, once a week, I'd have to call home and put on this show of who I was and what was going on. It took me a long time to accept that I could be okay with being out, because there was such a war internally with me, right? There was such a war in terms of, because I was a Christian. I was a good Christian boy who loved Jesus, right? Like, that was my upbringing. That's what I knew. That's what they taught to me. That's what I accepted. That's what I internalized. And so then this internalized homophobia of me being afraid of who I was and trying to reconcile that, even at ballet school, where it was pretty safe to come out. And, half the boys that I'm surrounded with are clearly gay. I could have been okay coming out. But again, I couldn't reconcile it within myself, and that, like, internalized homophobia and hate that I was just dealing with. Eventually, it just came clear to me that I couldn't do the Christian thing anymore, that I had to let that go. Like, I even had a little, like, ceremony for my little, 19-year-old self to divorce myself from Christianity and turn the other way and walk forward on my path for what I knew was true for me. Because I felt like I had to choose, because in that time, back in the 80s, right, it was a very different time. Gay people were just unacceptable. So I knew I had to be true to me, and so I left that and started to come out, which was, the first person I told was my sister. And are you seeing a theme here? My sister has always been there for me. She's the only person. I don't have family. I don't have parents. I don't have siblings that talk to me nicely or supportive of me. Never have. I have my sister. And, since she had her daughter, now I have, the two of them, because they're both very much on Team Dale. And the rest of the family is clearly not, because they're good Christians, and because I'm gay, and those two things are incompatible. I don't care how good of a Christian you are when you got your hands on literature that says gay people shouldn't exist. That isn't what good people do. Good people do not allow institutionalized bigotry into their life. No. Never in history has history smiled upon those who have the ability to go blind to the humanity and suffering of others. That's called privilege. That's called privilege when you have the option to go blind to the humanity and suffering of your fellow humans. That's privilege. So I came out to my sister. And that went fine, great, no problem, and we celebrated that, and hooray, I'm out now. I'm a big homo. Yay, we're the boys. Right? And then I came out to my brother. My younger brother is extremely born-again Christian, and while his first initial response was, "Oh, why didn't you tell me sooner?" it very quickly turned on me. And, flash forward many years later, and I'm asking him to be the best man at my wedding, and he flat out rejects me, my life, my relationship, everything, with, I've talked about before, his response was, as the man of the household, he is responsible for separating the wheat from the chaff, because the chaff's the part you throw away, right? So that continued to go from bad to worse, my relationship with my brother, because he was just so, certain in that his beliefs were right and that I was wrong and that he couldn't be there for me. He has never been there for me, and he has never allowed me to be a part of his family. Again, like when I say I have no family, like I do not include him or his wife or their kids, because I've seen them 3 times in my entire life. They keep their kids away from me because I am a homosexual. Bigotry much? I don't know. So, and then I came out to my parents, and that really didn't go well, but I knew it wouldn't, right? Because I knew that I had to be financially independent in order to come out to them. I knew that. I knew that this was not going to go well. I knew what I was dealing with, and I knew that being gay was not going to work for them. But I had to still be true to me, right? And so I came out in a letter that I wrote to them, and then I moved. And again, this was back in the 80s. There's no cell phones. It's much harder to get a hold of people if you don't know where they are. So I wrote this letter to my parents that was loosely based off of the letter that Michael Mouse writes in the series Tales of the City by Armistead Maupin. And in that book, the character Michael Mouse writes a letter to his parents to let them know that he's gay. Well, I kind of used some of that because it was a template that I could kind of, work from. And so I remember putting the letter in the mailbox and then closing it and just saying a little prayer to let them be okay. They were not okay. But I knew that. I knew what was coming because I knew my parents. I knew my stance on them and gay people. So I sent the letter and then moved. And about a year later, my sister called me and she said that, my parents are really looking for me. They don't know where I am. And I had moved to Florida. I was with a different ballet company then. And I was just this gypsy. I was just all over, just dancing all over the world and getting jobs and having a great time. Just living my best life, really, truly. And so anyhow, after my sister told me that, I called them. I called, and I'll never forget, my mom, and how much breath there was in her words. I'd never heard her talk that way before. And it was really difficult. And she asked me if I didn't want to come home and get help and get better. I knew that moment was coming. I knew that moment was coming. I knew that moment was coming when conversion therapy was on the table. And it was. And it terrified me. It truly terrified me that my parents wanted to institutionalize me to torture me, because that's what conversion therapy is, let's be really clear, to torture me in an institution in that type of a manner. And again, you can't be thinking about this in 2023. You have to be thinking about this back in the late 80s, where my friends were dying from AIDS left and right, and all the Christians were cussing us out for existing, right? And being dirty and being, diseased and being, it was just a very different environment. Like, gay people were spit on, like, actively all the time. We were beaten up actively all the time, right? Because we were just unacceptable. Again, it all traces back to the fact that the Jesus book says that gay people shouldn't exist. I don't know how to reconcile that. I will never arrive to conversations that holds that level of bigotry about my family, seeking to make friends with that which is bigoted against me. No. I will arrive to those conversations actively seeking to permanently silence the voice of hate. Where does that put us? It's an impasse, isn't it? It's an impasse. And that's one reason I've been in here, doing so much work on myself to try and get right with that institutionalized bigotry. Because certainly lots of Jewish people had to deal with institutionalized bigotry that they were living in, and they had to learn how to be okay. Certainly lots of Black Americans have had to live in institutionalized bigotry and get okay. Right? So I too have had to find a way that even the whole system that's set up around us is clearly set up to celebrate white supremacy / Christianity. And I'm sorry, but so long as those two things are looking at me and my humanity in the same way, you don't get to ask me to view those two things as different. They are not. Christianity reeks of white supremacy, does it not? Christianity and white supremacy are combined as political bedfellows in this country, are they not? Do they not have a lot of crossover in their ideology? They do. And again, when the Christians are hating on me and the white supremacists are hating on me, and it feels exactly the same coming from those two different groups, again, you don't get to ask me to see those two groups as different when they feel exactly the same to my soul. So, after I came out to my parents, and it was called, their hate was called on the carpet. And there it was. And again, as someone at least like me, I've always hoped for it to be different when it gets called. And whether that's asking them to come to my wedding or coming out, I'm always faced with the reality that my family, will always choose their religion over showing up for me, or being available for me, or seeing me as good or decent in anything that I'm doing. It's just not available to me, and I've had to accept that, right? So, I just had to walk away from my family completely. No, they disowned me, I disowned them. It was just that was just the real the first breaking up of the family, right? The second breaking up of the family came, again, like I said, when I got married to my first husband. John is my second husband. And like I said, I asked my brother to be my best man, and he not only said no, he shot me down in a very vicious kind of attack. And so I'm like, okay, that's... I'm just not safe there. There's nothing there for me that feels loving, nurturing, or that feels like it's like my brother just doesn't see me for a good person because I'm gay. And that's just where it is. And I don't know how to do anything about that. So anyhow, as you can see, Like the whole point of this exercise, right? I could go on and on and on and on about my life and how I have been marginalized, denied any relationship with my grandparents, like I talked about. Like when we went to go clean out my grandfather's house after he died, right? There's all these photos of, my siblings and their family and their kids, and there's none of mine. There's none of me. I've been erased from that entire generation because my mother told me to not come out to her parents. That was the one thing that she asked. And so, I said, okay. But what does that do to my soul? What is the messaging that that's sending to me from my clan, from my troop, from my inner circle? Right? I mean, it's just at every turn, I was ostracized and demonized. There was just no seeing me as a good person in their eyes because of that one thing. And it's so altered the way that I see myself and the way that I exist in the world and how safe I feel in the world and blah, 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 blah. Right? Because I could let my imagination live there and ruminate for a very long time. It's still super triggering to me. Even this morning, some, gay friend posted a yay Christians kind of meme. And I'm like, it just makes me feel like, especially when gay people celebrate openly homophobic institutions like the Christian, Mormon, or Jewish faith, all of those three massive organizations are printing literature to this day that says gay people shouldn't exist, that we're an abomination. It's just so unfair. It's just so unsafe for gay people to exist. And so, I feel further marginalized when I'm seeing other gay people celebrating Christianity. I just do. Because I feel like they don't see the struggle. They don't see what I went through, certainly. And they're not protecting the future generations of queer kids. I see the future generations of queer kids who are about to be damaged horribly by what they're being taught in their faith communities. I mean, turn on the news. We can't even have drag performances at Pride anymore. Right? Because the, political and Christian right sees that as an affront to their belief system because their belief system clearly says we shouldn't exist. And so they keep trying to write laws to just make us disappear. Well, I don't know how to disappear. I'm just here living my, little life and trying to get by in the world. But that is all stuff that has happened, isn't it? All my story. And I could find a lot there to, and I did for a long time. After I came out to my mother, she cried for 20 years, and I am not exaggerating. My mother cried for 20 years after I came out to her. Do you know how much internalized hate a young, sensitive gay boy can find within themselves for having done something to their parent that makes them cry for 2 decades? I lived with that and I took that on. And as a result, I think that that's a lot of the reasons why I would seek out situations where I would be attacked physically, where I would be beaten up. Because that was the intersection of self-loathing that I had for myself and intimacy with men. Man, that's all I could find. That's all I could allow myself in terms of intimacy with another man, and getting beaten up was the only place that I could find that was checking all the boxes. That doesn't work anymore. And that's why I've been in here fighting so hard for my own soul, right? And searching so hard for things that lift me up, because in my world, others aren't gonna do it. And I finally got tired of all the prescription medications and, the antidepressants and all this, and I just said, no. I just said no. I said, I'm going to go fix myself. Thank you. Keep your pills. Keep everything that's making me feel weird and making me not understand where I am today. And so I ditched all of that when we moved up here to where we live now on the ranch. 2 years ago, I ditched everything and I just started unearthing it, right? And that's when I started doing these videos, right? And just unpacking my mind and trying to find out what lives there, right? And it was through that process that I recognized that when I attach my imagination to what was, everything we've been talking about lately, when I attach my imagination to go splunking through my mind, right, and find all of that lack that lives there. How much lack lives in my past? Oh, so much, right? And for that I am blessed. For that I am blessed because it was so painful and so big in my mind that I had to find a way to try and tackle it for myself, to try and bring it into a right-sized kind of way so that I could coexist with it. But it was through that process that I found that, again, look at how much lack is in my past. So much. And I could make myself crazy every day by going through that and ruminating and going through, how my mother told me that it was me being gay that killed my father. And I could spend days and days and days and days wondering how much of that is true, because it's not 0 and it's not 100%. But it's some percentage of me being gay killed my father, that he died from disappointment. I could go there, so I have gone there for years, right? But I can't do that to myself anymore. And it's through this process that I recognize that I'm doing that to myself and I don't have to. That is an option, that we do not have to live in the past, allowing our ego and our imagination to jerk themselves off, right? Because that's what you're doing. You're sitting in your room and you're going, oh, it's so wrong and so awful and so blah, 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 and this was wrong and this, and I feel so victimized from this and blah, blah, blah. And that's what you're doing. Your ego and your imagination are just jerking themselves off. We don't have to do that. We can get into today and drop all the crazy. Just let it go away. It's not here. It's not today. And I refuse to bring all of that garbage of what was into what is. That's the formula for success. Not bringing what was into what is. Because what is really great. What is happening today, and there's so much opportunity there, right? So when I'm in today and I can just be in my studio, not attached to, my imagination harming me, right? But I can just be attached to and stay in the present moment endlessly, right? To be there. The timeline is so interesting, and it's something I really first discovered while driving, and that's why, again, driving is so important to me, because on the timeline, right, as we're going through the timeline on this, right, we have to connect to the present moment, to the present moment, to the present moment, to the present moment. But while you're doing that, that really is the space where you become unwounded from the past and unwoundable. How are you unwoundable? When somebody is acting inappropriate in your environment, you can immediately say, that's not me. And the second that they've done something that could potentially harm you, it's gone. And it's practicing that, allowing the past to be fully gone. To be fully gone. The second it leaves, it is no longer in your world. Yes, obviously we have to remember things and we have to know things and things like that, but that is the appropriate way to use the mind, not to go into your past and go over what happened and harm yourself some more and do all of that game, right? So, but then when we're dealing with the present moment, it gives us the clarity to start looking forward, to what's coming up, to start looking forward to what we got in our life, right? There are two major shifts that you will experience in this work. The first one happens when you stop seeing the war as happening out there, the war that you need to fix and respond to out there. When you stop seeing the war happening out there and start seeing the war happening in here, and that everything that's happening out there serves only to inform you of the war that's going on in here. I can still be highly triggered or highly upset or anything else like this by what's happening in the world, but that information only serves to tell me where I'm off, right? It's such a game changer to shift your perspective from working on the world to working on only yourself. And that everything that's happening in the world is there to inform you of what's off and where your work is. That's the first significant shift. But where I am in my work right now is showing me, this next major shift that is going to be super interesting. Because when you get to a certain level in the work, you recognize that we only have the ability to harm ourselves. And that when we're really aware of our personal container and our personal vibe and how we're functioning in the world, we start to recognize that when I get angry, I'm injecting anger into myself. When I get frustrated, I'm injecting frustration into myself. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to harm myself. I need to be mindful first and foremost of my container and my vibe. That's where the angel of neutrality comes in, right? Because it talks about how opinions are too costly to our soul. I can't have an opinion on something without seeing something as good and bad, right and wrong. And that right there is the dynamic we're trying to get away from. We will eventually evolve past Christianity and most religions. Most religions in the future will be seen as kind of archaic and old. Why? Old ways of thinking? Because right now where we stand, we can't even envision a world that's not based in good and evil. The whole system, like we talked about last video, is formulated from behind the lens of the ego. There's good and bad in everything. All of our churches talk about good and evil, right? And that's the paradigm shift that we need to make. We need to get away from good and bad and stop seeing bad and only see good. Can you imagine a world where everybody is running around helping one another instead of harming one another, where there are mass healings going on rather than mass shootings? That right there is the dynamic, like the paradigm shift that we need to make from seeing the world from behind the lens of the ego of good and bad and right and wrong to seeing the world from behind the lens of love, where you actually detach from others. Why? Again, we are to be master and commander of us, not of others. We heal the planet by healing ourselves, not others. Yes, you will, as an example to others, help them along their way. But until you yourself have done the work, you are continuing in the negative cycle. So the second shift, like the second major shift, happens when you recognize that we can only hurt ourselves. We can't hurt other people. And we detach from the connection from others. In a way, it's like, remember we talked about the duality of being, self-centered versus centered in self? When you get so centered in self that you detach from others and that you can see them as acting poorly or inappropriate as them harming them, not them harming you, because they can't do that without your permission. And once you gain controls over you and become master and commander of you and your vibe at all times, and you truly have a solid container for yourself, you can stand in front of people who are being unloving or crazy. And you can recognize that everything that they are doing has everything to do with them and nothing to do with you. That's the place we're trying to get to. That's real freedom, right? Having master and commander of your vibe, your container, and everything that you are. Locate yourself. Where are you? Where is your mind? Is it out in the world? Is it running crazy? Is it running unchecked? Or are you seated in self, experiencing the current day and looking forward to your life? That's where we are today. I hope you had the opportunity to see what my mind does when I talk about the past. Look at how much lack there always will be in the past. Because again, as the ego mind parses out the information, right, one of its two buckets will be love and lovelessness, because it's trying to understand where it is on that, continuum. Like, what was that event? Was it loving or unloving? Well, in order to show you loving, it has to show you unloving. Right? And that's the dynamic of good and bad that we're trying to get out of. Lose the bad completely. You don't have to have the bad. You can have all the good. All good, all high vibrations all the time. Because a loving dynamic is like me and my pets, right? Like, we just love each other. And when we're in each other's presence, we both are creating more love for each other. So it's a relationship where we both benefit out of the transaction, out of being together. We both are lifting each other up equally. Imagine if our employment centers were like that, right? Where people were running around trying to help one another instead of harm one another. That's where we're going. You only hurt yourself. We need to learn to stop doing that. So anyways, that's where we are today. And I thank you so much. And I'll talk to you next time. Bye.